Greetings, magnificent souls, to the Lily Bewley podcast, where we have open and honest discussions about ourselves. This is your host, Lily Bewley, and I'm honored to have conversations here with thought leaders, visionaries, healers, and even solo conversations with myself about things I am currently reflecting on. This is a place where we break down, break away, and break through our emotional trauma, allowing ourselves to be healthy, be happy, and live a peaceful life. We are tired of being sick and tired. We are tired, but we are not giving up. We know that there is something magnificent inside of us. And because we are fighting daily, hourly, and by the minute, fighting ourselves, our kids, our spouses, we have to do things differently. We have to break the cycle. We don't have a million chances. We have to be happy now. We have to find a way. So how do we do that? How is that possible? If you look around at what society is telling you, they tell you that what we're doing is impossible. Yet it's happening every single day. And it's happening through the practice and the love that we call awakening the magnificent soul. We are all magnificent souls, and these are our stories of healing. Today in episode 100, I welcome Alexia Vernon to the show to chat about stepping into your Moxie. And don't forget to let me know your thoughts about this episode or anything you would like me to cover on future podcasts at epiphanyvault.com. Remember, it is a safe place, and I would welcome the discussion. And also a request, if you are enjoying the show, please rate and share and review so that we can really get the word out to more and more souls who want to awaken and who want to heal. And on to my show today. My guest, Alexia Vernon, is the president of Step Into Your Moxie, a vocal empowerment company that shows executives, senior leaders, and entrepreneurs how to find their voice and master it using communication. Dubbed a Moxie Maven by the White House Office of Public Engagement, Alexia is a go-to speaker and thought-leading coach for business leaders and the coaches and consultants who develop them. Alexia has been featured by media including CNN, NBC, ABC, CBS, and Entrepreneur. Please enjoy my conversation with Alexia Vernon. All right, Alexia, it's such a pleasure to have you here. We had such a nice chat. It's so nice connecting with you. And I'm glad to drop in with you here today.
I'm looking forward to this conversation as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So, as I always do, I crushed your book this weekend, Step Into Your Moxie, and I really enjoyed it. I really feel like that we have some kindred maybe like growth experiences, like I like to say, or some really probably very, very similar experiences as we've been growing and developing. But I'd like to start with, what is Moxie, and what does it mean to step into your Moxie, and why is this a hard thing for most people?
When I refer to stepping into your Moxie, I think of it as the mindset and the skill set to be able to walk into any room, into any conversation, onto any stage, and to be able to unapologetically speak up for yourself, for the ideas and issues that matter most to you and to your organization, if you've got one, and to call people to take action. And there's a lot baked into that answer. But what I hope people hear is that it's not just about having confidence. It's also about having that internal power of influence and being able to move people toward outcomes through your communication. And for coaches who often feel really called to want to help people find their voices, I find that that's because so many of us have had a really circuitous route to finding our own. And so there is that desire to be able to do for others what has taken us a long time to figure out how to do productively for ourselves.
Yeah, that is so true. I think I just posted about this yesterday on Facebook, and it's like, every time I show up for myself and I speak up for myself, something great happens. And I think, it's harder. It seems like what you're saying is that it's harder than just having the confidence. What would you like, what would you say the key is? Is it like embodying the confidence, or is it like, I don't know, what would you say? Is it more than just, why is it just more than confidence?
Recently, and I promise this will relate, I developed a certification program for people who want to do vocal empowerment work with their clients. And there's nothing that helps you codify the stuff you teach and work with clients on than training other people to lead it. And so in that process, I realized where I think a lot of people who genuinely want to help themselves, or who are, let's say, coaches and trainers and consultants want to help their people, where we get stuck is not understanding what all the different facets are of vocal empowerment. And so the foundation, which I think a lot of us are familiar with if we have any kind of background in self-improvement, is inner voice. So you've read the book. So that's the thing about identifying who's holding the microphone in your brain, whether that's a critic, whether that's a cop who might be doing a lot of policing and judgment about decisions, whether that's a cheerleader who might sound super optimistic, but is saying yes to everything and telling you you've got stuff and might be leading you to burnout, or whether you have an inner coach as your inner voice who's always asking questions and who's helping you to step into your moxie, but also to get your needs met in the process. But that's the base. There's other components that we oftentimes forget, and therefore we're feeling like, wait, why am I not consistently showing up for visibility opportunities? Why am I not consistently moving people to take action? The next layer is physiological sensation. So actually being able to play nicely with the sensations that come up when we are in high stakes conversations, when we are being interviewed, when we are making a presentation, and having the habits of being able to breathe through that and recognize that there's a way to be able to harness everything we're feeling to fuel our communication rather than to get us in our own way. There's the actual messaging and communication. And one of the things I talk a lot about is the importance of role playing aloud the things that we want to say, rather than reviewing them in our heads and getting stuck ruminating. So getting clear on the messaging we're going to use and making sure that that's actually going to move people to take action. So it's not just something we feel entitled to say, but rather it's in our own strategic interest. Understanding what factors into presence, so not just our words, but also the nonverbals, and getting comfortable, particularly for those who are women, taking up space and not playing small. And I don't just mean as a theory, but literally physically taking up space rather than crossing our legs too much or crossing our arms or pulling back from audiences when we're in front of them. You can tell I do a lot of speaking because audiences always come up in my examples. And ultimately moving people to take action. So really understanding what goes into persuading people, and not from a creepy, manipulative perspective, but from a place of values, so that we feel like we can be heart-centered and also high impact in our communication. So there's a lot there. And I know when I first started out as a coach, I wasn't a speaking coach. I was doing a lot around leadership. And oftentimes communication would come up because it's really hard to separate communication from leadership. And I would spend a lot of time talking about inner voice and messaging and confidence. But it wasn't until, I don't know, maybe 5 years into my business, and this year marks 15. So it's been a long time, that I realized I'm missing some of these pieces. And once the system got codified around some of those missing pieces, not only did I realize that despite being an introvert and kind of gawky in front of audiences, I could show up more consistently and have the impact I wanted, but that it was working for clients, whether they were introverts or extroverts or somewhere in between, that I realized, oh yeah, it makes sense that we're not thinking holistically enough about what makes for the ability to speak up and do it well.
Yeah. I keep thinking, well, a few things. First of all, the critic and the cheerleader, you like basically, I put my hand on my heart. You can't see me, but I put my hand on my heart because you basically described my home life. So I feel seen, Alexia. Thank you. Yes. And then the other part too was I keep thinking about how what you're saying relates to boundaries. Because I talk a lot about here about boundaries, like boundaries are my thing in love and relationships context. I know that we have a lot of change makers that listen to this too, but I just keep thinking in my head, like, this sounds like boundaries to me. It sounds like boundaries. Would you agree?
Totally. It's
Mm,
one of the core tenets of whenever I'm teaching the different applications of where we need to speak up, boundaries are a part of them. And I think boundaries oftentimes get interpreted as what I'm not willing to do or like self-care rather than I think we're in alignment from what you've shared in terms of how we see boundaries, that it's being able to articulate in a compassionately candid way. It's both of those things, what is needed for us to show up and speak up and serve in our lives, in our businesses, in our careers in a way that fundamentally also supports others to be in the best relationship they possibly can be with us.
mm,
And I know in my own boundary setting, and let me be clear, like I was a hot mess when it came to boundaries for so long. The
yes.
first area where I learned to articulate my boundaries was in friendships. And I think because I just had a lot of psychological safety in my friendships. But I can remember being in grad school and I was still an actor at the time. And my best friend was also the director of the theater company that I worked with. And I would, have these boundary conversations of I will not come and rehearse on these days because I need a day off. And I was candid, but the compassion was missing, as was the ability to frame this as the more I'm able to take care of some of these needs for myself, the more I can show up, be a pleasant performer for you, give you my best work, entertain audiences, generate more creative material since we devised our own original theater. Like it's a win-win.
Yeah.
And when we look at boundaries from this perspective of heart-centered, high-impact communication, not only do we tend to feel better creating the boundary because we recognize, oh, my boundary is not inconveniencing someone else. Rather, it's setting our relationship up to be more mutually beneficial.
Yeah, 100%. And I love how you point that out because I have definitely gone through that process and it's what I teach with my clients too. Actually, I had a conversation about this yesterday. Um, was that the perception of boundaries right now is this just like it's kind of reactive in a way, right? So what you're saying, and I think what connects, I think we're on the same level about is that it's so proactive because it takes care of us. And it's more than just saying like, no, which is a boundary, y'all. So I'm just going to say, like, that's where you start. I feel like that no is like where you start. But then also when you're able to say, like Alexia is saying, is like, I really don't want to rehearse on Saturday because if I'm rehearsing on Saturday, it's like day 6, and day 6, I am not giving my best. And it's just not going to be good for everybody here, or like whatever those words are for you. But it's just like, so it's like you said, it's like a mutual conversation about an end goal, really, which is like
Mhm.
if you're in friendships or relationships or whatever, or dating or whatever context or business, it's like y'all wouldn't be there if you didn't have an end goal. And if you don't have an end goal, then maybe you shouldn't be there. You know what I
So
mean?
true.
Yeah. Yeah.
So often our communication, particularly in high stakes situations, emerges reactively rather than proactively. And it
Totally.
is so much easier to have a proactive high stakes conversation, whether it's a negotiation, whether it's about a
Mm-hmm.
boundary, whether it's
Mm-hmm.
about anything else under the sun,
Mm-hmm.
because usually we're entering with the energy of abundance
Mm-hmm.
and capacity rather than burnout and bitterness.
Mm-hmm.
And it makes sense that so many of us struggle with that because so many things in our society are decided after there's a problem rather than to flourish in possibility and prevent the problem from happening in the first place.
Hmm. Yes. And yeah, my mantra for 2022 is collaboration over competition, which I think is like that hits for me, it like hits every point. So yeah, that's dope.
That's a
Thank you.
great mantra.
Yeah, thank you. It's been working really well so far. And thank you for being here,
Good.
Alexia.
Good. I'm a part of the
Yeah.
mantra.
Yes, thank you. Um, so here's something that really came out for me in your book. And so we didn't really chat about this before, but I'm interested if you want to go this route, we can.
If I wrote about it, it's fair game.
Okay, fair enough. So the feminine and masculine dynamics, this is my thing. This is my current thing that I'm going to be here for a while, and I love it. Why? I don't know. I kind of just want to open it up. Why is that important when we're talking about feminine and masculine dynamics in regards to your work and how you lead and what you do?
I'm going to share a story that I share in the book because it
Mhm.
embodies this really well. But I want to point out that when we are talking about feminine and masculine, I'm not talking about men and women. These are
Mhm.
about qualities that can present whether we identify as men, women, or non-binary. And I always like
Mhm.
to say that because
I
I think
love
it's
it.
really easy to assume that what I'm about to share always skews the way that it did in my story. Hopefully this will all make sense in a moment. So probably 3 years after I hung out my shingle as a coach, I had the opportunity to be the closing keynote speaker at a social enterprise conference. And I got to the event a little bit early in time for the participants' pitch fest. Each of the approximately 100 people who were in attendance at this event had a couple of minutes to present their big idea for how they wanted to harness entrepreneurial solutions to solve a big social, economic, or environmental problem. And the pitches were across the board really excellent. They were bold, they were well
Mm.
researched, they were full of heart. This was not a Shark Tank style event where there was an outside panel of judges. Everybody in the room had equal voice. And the room was 50% female, 50% male, and the average age was probably 25 or 26. And I'm sharing those details with you so that you can appreciate when everybody in the room voted and the finalists' names were announced, why I was so surprised.
Mm.
Because every single finalist was a man. Not one person who identified as a woman was picked.
Mm.
And so whenever I get stirred up, which is frequent, I feel things really deeply. I try to ask questions though, rather than make assumptions. And so I asked whoever would speak to me what just happened and why were no voices of women picked. And what I heard was interesting, but it made a lot of sense, even though it was disturbing. So everyone who I talked to, irrespective of their gender identity, said, well, we picked who is the best pitcher. And when I said, well, what do you mean by that? They would say, well,
Mm.
we picked who took up a lot of space, speakers who projected confidence, who felt really certain that their ideas were not only fundable, but that their ideas would lead to the impact that they intended. And of course, that kind of correlated more heavily with men. But where things got really interesting is that when I asked
Mm.
who were the speakers that you felt most connected to, whose ideas you would want to champion or even fund if you were in that position, what I heard again and again and again were a lot of the names of people who identified as women. When I asked why, they said, well, a lot of the women told stories. They were humble.
Mm.
In many cases saying, I'm not ready to accept funding yet because I want to do a little bit more research. I want to get some more letters after my name, but none of that was seen as effective pitching.
Mm.
And so that day was so startling for me for a number of reasons. One, I realized that tension was like a tension that had been living inside of me since I was 19 years old and my speaking career started. I was always ping-ponging between the masculine, which there's definitely elements of my communication style that had that, but there's also a lot of elements of my communication style that are inherently feminine, and some of that is effective, some of it isn't.
Mhm.
And most of us are in that divide. Pitch fests might be a more public pronouncement of gender than everyday communication. But really, what everyone was saying was that it required a bit of a fusion of the masculine and the feminine to
Mm.
make a speaker who not only seemed confident, but who you also trusted and wanted to follow. And so in the book, I talk about the different archetypes that many of us can fall into in our communication. So when we are going particularly feminine, a creature that is a great archetype for this is a bunny. And if you think about a bunny, they are cute and cuddly, or if you think about Playboy, they're sexy. With respect to our communication when we're going bunny, oftentimes we're giving way too much context. We're using phrases like I think, or I feel, or I believe, rather than stating it because it's inferred that we think, feel, believe it. We might be not taking up a lot of physical space. We might be asking for permission. Now, on the other side of the spectrum, when we are really in kind of a masculine hustle-like energy, I call that the dragon.
Mm,
And if you think about a dragon, they are fiery. And so with respect to our communication, it might mean that we're loud and we're brazen, but not in a way that's calling people in a way that's like, look at me, I want the power here.
mhm,
When we're going dragon, usually we're not asking a lot of questions. We're making assumptions. It's our way or the highway, and people might follow us, but they don't really respect us.
mm,
And so the goal is not to fuse both of those things. It's to find a different paradigm that really allows us to step into our moxie on a more consistent basis. And
mm,
I call that archetype the cheetah. And I think cheetahs are so incredibly badass. They can accelerate faster than any other land mammal, up to 65 miles per hour in a matter of seconds. And if you think about a cheetah, it's almost as if there's tear marks that are permanently imprinted on the face. And so,
mm,
what the heck does all this mean in terms of communication? Well, in communication, there are times when we want to step up and speak up. And there's a lot of times where we want to step back and ask questions and listen to
mm,
be able to co create answers that are in the best interest of not just us, but anybody that we're seeking to move to action.
mhm,
It also means we want to be in touch with our emotions, and not that we need to necessarily cry in public, although if we do, it's not the end of the world. But when we don't give ourselves license to feel what needs to be felt, usually that energy gets stuck. And I find that when people don't give themselves permission to really feel, that's when you'll notice that people will say, I feel really scared. They're not actually feeling scared necessarily. What they're feeling is a lot of trapped sensation that's not able to move through the
mm.
body. And so I could go on and on all day about the cheetah, but what I hope people are taking away is this idea of, irrespective of your gender, what might it look like, whether you think about the cheetah or not, to envision communication as a way of eliciting more of your authentic presence and not contorting yourself into who you feel other people want you to be.
Mm, yeah, I love that because, like, for me, I kept thinking, well, it must be a balance. It must be a balance, and I have. That's something that I've been developing after, my voice being minimized for decades, really, and the growth for me has been all of this we talk about, and the listeners have listened to me for over 3,000 hours, so they know what I'm like, what I'm about. But like for me, it's like there must be. I love how you put in authentic because I know I have a feeling that some of the women maybe are triggered about that, about the bunny. And so if y'all are, let's sit with it, let's hang out with it, because I think that, like, there's a lot of different factors. We could probably go on and on and on about this, about society and family dynamics and all of the conditioning that we've been through. But the growth that I've experienced is like this cheetah as hell. And I'm like, I'm here for it because it's my authentic balance. And for me, I believe that my emotions are a superpower. And it's funny because after I was on a podcast interview earlier this week where I was a guest, and I read your book, and I'm realizing, like, even in my bio, like, I'm reading it from the lens of a cheetah. And even when in my bio, it's like, I came up with these archetypes rather than these are the archetypes. And it's like such a difference of, and even though, I don't know, I think that like there are little things, right? So in communication in relationships, we're normally taught to say how you feel, which is not a bad thing. But it can also be the balance of, I feel this way, and would you mind, whatever it is that you're asking for is also a very masculine way, right? So there's just like beautiful, I don't know if that makes any sense, but there's just like beautiful dynamic between balancing that cheetah energy, when communicating and stuff. Does that make sense?
Yes. And what works in one context doesn't always work in another context. And that's where I
Mm,
could geek out all day in the difference between strategy and actually tactic. Because while
mm,
strategies might apply across context, so one of the things I talk about in terms of being able to prepare for a presentation or a negotiation or a pitch or even a daring conversation with a loved one is to
mm,
reverse engineer from the desired call to action that you have. That's the strategy. And that will work in any high stakes conversation or presentation that you're going to have. but the actual tactics of what you might do moment to moment might work swimmingly with a romantic partner where you do lead, as you said, Lily, with I feel.
Mm-hmm.
But when we're doing that in a pitch, I feel that is diminishing, but it worked really well in another context. And so if I'm hearing you correctly, it's about recognizing we want to know that our communication ultimately is moving people toward an outcome that's not just good for us, but that's good for both.
Truth.
And that might be the same goal across contexts, but how we get there needs to be flexible.
Interesting. It's the whole reading the room, right?
Which is
Oh, I
definitely
love
more
that.
complicated when we're not always in the room with the
Yeah.
other people now.
Yeah, that's true. It's a whole other thing for sure. What do you think that people get wrong about developing speaking confidence in their confidence?
Thinking that speaking confidence is going to come from, as Malcolm Gladwell would probably say, your 10,000 hours. And the
Yes.
reason that's problematic, and I'm a perfect example, I easily got my 10,000 hours by the time I was 30 years old. And when I was 30, I was still shaking inside, even if people couldn't see it most of the time when I spoke. And the reason is because it's not that we can't do it. I mean, by my 10,000 hours, I had minimized filler words. Like I could do the technique of effective speaking really well, but I hadn't gotten to that place of embodiment. And so earlier we talked about those different levels, but if we don't change our experience of what's happening in our bodies when we speak and tell a story that for most of us is different than what we've been conditioned to tell ourselves. So instead of, I'm feeling anxious, oh, they're going to find out that I don't know as much as I am presenting that I do, too, I'm experiencing sensation. It's objective. And that's awesome. It means I care. I'm in the game. I'm ready to play to my edge. And in any moment, if I don't know what to say next or I goof, I can stop. I can smile. I can breathe. I don't need to control anything. I just have to be 100% focused on connection. Because when I'm really connecting with the person or the people I'm talking to, it doesn't matter what comes out of my mouth. I could say all the likes, so's in the world. I could make a mistake and say, let's pause. I'm going to rewind and try it again. And we have people riveted, even if we've goofed on the communication, because there's that connection and we're that present. And I find when clients or friends, or when I am able to remember that, all the stuff of feeling like I'm out of control dissipates, because the goal stops being control. It stops being memorizing. And instead, it's clarity of what my intention is, focus on where we're headed. But then in the moment, it's true presence and trust, a lot of self-trust that whatever emerges, I can figure this out.
Yeah. Oh, that's beautiful. Yeah, absolutely. A few things came up for me with that. One of them being, yeah. So I've been thinking about lately, like going to Toastmasters, because one of my really good friends has been doing that. And I've realized that for me, my experience with like Toastmasters would be a seeking of perfection that I'm okay with not being. Like, I'm really okay saying like a lot. I'm really okay saying for now, and just right now my full expression is enough. So that really came up for me when you were saying that.
I work with a fair amount of people who've had negative Toastmasters experiences and who are recovering perfectionists, which has nothing to do with Toastmasters.
Of course, of course.
I want to be really honest that I will never critique somebody else's system, especially if I haven't experienced it. But what I will critique is any system or approach to speaking that is about rote memorization or about perfection, and that is ultimately about robotic delivery,
Yeah.
rather than making space for messiness and humanity to emerge. And there's
Yeah.
a distinction. And whenever I do speaker training, it's always magical because you see the moment in real time where it pops for somebody between, so like whatevs, and it's all over the place because it's actually not honest because the person is thinking about themselves and not allowing themselves to be seen. But when a word like, comes out because it's the perfect word to describe what's happening, where it's like messy and juicy and we don't know what's going to happen next, but we're vibing. And I realize
Mm-hmm.
people who are listening can't see what I'm doing, but like we're looking at people.
Mm-hmm.
That's delicious. And
Mm-hmm.
that is never a problem. And I find that particularly for a lot of women who are trying to have control over things, communication becomes one of those areas where the desire to control is huge. That it's in that unraveling and surrendering to connection over perfection, which I'll probably say a lot and it can get old, but it's really true.
I love that.
And holding clear, what is it that we're moving towards? So is it being really unapologetic about what we will no longer tolerate? Is it being really clear about this is why enrolling in my business or in my program can help you to be able to get out of the habits you've said you are beyond over with, but can't seem to create new habits on top of, like
Mm-hmm.
whatever it is, that sometimes that is messy. But there's a distinction between I'm a mess and the communication might have moments of mess, but we're ultimately calling people in and we're having a delicious experience with them.
I love it. I just know I'm going to be calling you when I'm on Oprah, but for now I'm good.
Please do.
Thank
And
you.
I've actually had clients on Oprah.
That's
And
amazing.
I've had that call, and it's one of the best calls. It's not just, that I'm going to be on Oprah, but mainly that call of, I didn't envision that I could have visibility on such and such platform.
Mm-hmm.
And we help clients with pitching, but like most of the time, those awesome opportunities, like the really big ones, aren't things that they've pitched. It's things that they've called in after having a lot of conversations and interviews and so forth, where the goal is not, I want to be smart enough, I want to be seen as funny, I want to be seen as credible, and rather, I care so deeply about this message for people
Exactly.
that I'm 100% focused on ensuring that they connect to this idea and they see what's possible. Because when we're
Yes.
doing that, there's no room for the self-doubt and the self-judgment to emerge at the same time. It just can't happen. Which I know when
Yes.
I realized that was revelatory. Like, wait, what? If I'm truly looking at the eyes of the people in my audience and pausing and stopping and smiling and connecting with them, I can't have space to judge myself. Well, crap, why didn't I do this a long time ago? Because not only does it make me a better speaker, it actually feels so much better.
Mm-hmm. I feel it already in my stomach. It feels good. Thank you so much. So amazing. Um, so kind of closing up a little bit, I think we've talked a little bit about this, but I want to make it explicit. We talked about this before. I'm in love and dating and relationships right now. And we have talked a little bit about relationships, peppering that in. But how would you say stepping into your Moxie looks like either personally or professionally, whatever you want to go, as it pertains to dating and love and relationships?
My husband is also my business partner. And so
Mm,
everything that I do through Step Into Your Moxie is informed from his perspective.
interesting.
And I'm often known for working with a lot of women, although I find it fascinating that since COVID, so many of my clients who've recently emerged have been men, particularly male executives who recognize that the way that they've communicated in the past got them to where they are, which is awesome. But that in this great reset, they want to be able to show up more as their authentic selves with other members of their C-suite, with their VPs and their teams, and most of all with their families and their partners at
Yep.
home. And so what I would say is that let's go back to the definition of stepping into your Moxie for a moment. Being able to have the mindset and the skill set to walk into any room, into any
Mm,
conversation, onto any stage, let's stick with conversation for the moment and unapologetically speak up for ourselves, for the ideas and issues that we're passionate about, and to move people to take action. What I find is that for most of us, the most uncomfortable place to do that Moxie work is with the people who are closest to us, whether that's a romantic partner, whether that's with a child, or whether that's with our family of origin, because there's so much stuff there. And usually we're somewhat tap dancing on eggshells, striving for no conflict, because the possibility of conflict feels really high in those personal relationships. And I'd say it's probably only in the last year where what I've thought about conflict has really shifted from something that I try to run toward rather than run away from. And I want to be clear what I mean by that. Conflict that's just an explosion and goes nowhere is totally useless conflict. And it can be really damaging for ourselves and for other people. And that's not what I'm talking about. But conflict that's about us being compassionately candid and unapologetic in pursuit of transforming and sometimes disrupting a situation that is toxic for us or for others, that's beautiful conflict. So my husband and I had one of those conversations right before I came on. I was like, doing the eye dab after, where some changes happened in our daughter's school today. And like, it just felt, I'm somebody, like I said earlier, who feels deeply, and he's a slightly slower processor where he needs to think and feel. And, we had one of those moments where like my voice definitely raised, his voice raised, but it wasn't like, oh, this is the same conversation we always have. Thankfully, most of our fights feel different because we don't have the same conflict over and over. It's like, I mean, not to say nothing's ever emerged twice, but most of the time it's like, this was a new dynamic, a new situation we haven't really had to wrestle with before. And so like, but I felt like there was that ability to be unapologetic about where I'm coming from and what I need as I navigate this decision.
Yes.
And in our relationships, I'm not a relationship coach, but I love pursuing that dynamic with clients, particularly in the workplace with people who are in proximity to them. But I find that when people work that same thing we're talking about in their personal relationships, those relationships really deepen as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. Intimacy.
Vulnerability, and also the ability to trust that we can be honest and we can be unapologetic and bold. And that if a relationship is built on trust, if there's psychological safety, we can weather tough times. I grew up in a home where my mom never wanted to rock the boat ever with my father. And I get that because he is a challenging person. And to this day, he's my least favorite person to have a high stakes conversation with, even though we've been close. But it took me a long time to have tough conversations where I knew that other people were likely to be mad, see things from a different perspective, or be disappointed with me. And that had a really negative impact in my business, particularly on the boundary side of things, because there would be clients who I adored, but there would be some breaches that weren't good for me. And ultimately, it wasn't good modeling for them that I would let persist for too long until usually I would get to the point where I wanted to scream. And then I was coming from a place of candor, but oftentimes the empathy and the kindness was missing because I'd waited too long. And similarly in, I think, our romantic relationships, that when we bring something up pretty close to when it's happened, it's so much easier to tango than when we've been stuffing something down for so long and then it's an ulcer or cancer or something terrible has to happen to actually unlock for us to speak up.
Yeah, exactly. Wow. Woo, that's a whole other podcast right there, girl. But yeah, that's a skill that I've learned too. And I think what else I was going to say about when we were talking, a couple minutes back, is that I recognize in myself when a conversation is going to be hard, and I say that, and that is a great buffer for me of like even my dad, my dad and your dad probably friends, but with him, I'm like, sometimes I have to, or even not even with him, just with everyone, when I know that I'm like checking myself on like like I know we all have a great relationship with perfection. When I'm checking myself, like, ooh, like, this, I don't know how to say this. In the old days, I would push it down and not say it. But in the new Lily, it's like, hey, this is really hard for me to say, but I'm going to say it anyways. It's going to come out imperfect. And that's the best that I can, if that's the best that I can do, it's better than nothing. And I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Love it. Well, I appreciate you coming on and talking to us today. It's been amazing. I know you have some things you're working on right now, right?
I am incredibly excited and really proud of is the Step Into Your Moxie certification program I lead, which is designed for coaches and consultants and trainers and HR leaders, basically any helping professional who wants to do vocal empowerment work with their clients or with their employees, who wants to get trained in the system and use it in their business or in their company. And then I also do Step Into Your Moxie live events. I've actually got one of those coming up in April, which is 2 days in Las Vegas, where people can get up in front of a room and really practice not only finding their message and their voice, but also navigating that discomfort as they get more and more comfortable communicating stories and whatever they stand for in their businesses.
Wow, that sounds amazing. I'm gonna have to check my calendar.
All the deets are on stepintoyourmoxie.com. You can see certification details and also live event details are on there. And both have how did you hear about things so that I can give a little thank you. So if you're listening to the podcast, please make sure to listen to list Lily if that was your connection to either one of those events.
Thank you. Thanks, Alexia. Oh, so amazing. Where else can people find you? Instagram? Where else are you?
Instagram. I love LinkedIn. It's one of my favorite platforms. Facebook, and I'm Alexia Vernon everywhere, with the exception of the website, which is stepintoyourmoxie.com.
Yes, and get the book, y'all. It's no matter where you are, in relationship. I think it can be translated no matter where you are. If you're looking to do some advancement in personal growth or in business as well, it's a great step, and I loved it. There are a lot of things that I took away immediately, so I really enjoyed it. Thank you, Alexia. I appreciate you.
My pleasure. Thanks for holding space for this conversation.
Thank you. So I loved this conversation today with Alexia, and I believe it's super important. And we talked a lot about using it in business and also in the context of relationships, because our Moxie is unique to us. And it's such a beautiful reclamation of ourselves, reclamation of our voice, and reclamation of who we are at our core. And that's it for today. And remember, y'all, I love you. I support you. And I'm really so honored and full of gratitude that you are here. So thank you for being here, and big love today.